Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Henry Shepard, Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative, and we're very pleased to be joined by two outstanding colleagues to share a webinar on engaging alumni from virtual exchange programs. We have today with us Waidehi Gokhale and Jen Chen, Waidehi from Solia and Jen from World Learning, to share some insights from their programs and have a discussion and answer questions with the audience. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to them to lead this presentation. Thanks so much, and keep in mind that we'll be answering your questions at the end of the presentation. So you're welcome to type them in the questions box in the control panel. If you have any technical issues or any questions, you're always welcome to email us at stevensinitiative@aspeninst.org. And with that, I'll turn it over to the presenters. Thanks again.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Waidehi. I am the CEO of Solia. We are a small international not-for-profit organization. We have been around for about 15 years doing virtual exchange programs. What you see on the screen in front of you is a shot of our platform, which is the medium through which we conduct our global programs. So we have, just to give you a quick snapshot of the organization before I move into the key topic, we have virtual dialogue exchange programs, and we have about 4 models of those. Those are our flagship programs. The original program is called the Connect program, and we work with post-secondary youth from North America, Europe, the Middle East and North Africa, as well as South and Southeast Asia. We bring them together in small group facilitated dialogue processes. And that is the core of our work. And then our second program is a facilitation training program, which we implement to train the facilitators who then assist with the moderation of those dialogue groups. This is a very brief snapshot of our kind of scope, the scale and scope of what we do. We've been, as I say, around for about 15 years, and we partner with institutions of higher education or language learning or religious education, or community-based organizations that have a youth community linked to them, and that is how we bring young people into the dialogue. The groups themselves are about 10 to 12 young people. The programs last anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, and the groups are deliberately multilateral. So you tend to have young people from ideally 8 to 10 places in each of the groups. We, at this point, are putting between 3,000 and 4,000 young people through the program per year, and through the dialogue programs across the various models. And then we also have approximately 300 to 400 folks training per year as well. So that is really the background of what we do. And so, as you can imagine, what that lends itself to is large communities of alumni. So I think the way that I want to give you the information is kind of to tell you a little bit about what we tried, why we tried it, and give you a sense of the 2 different alumni communities with whom we've tried to do our work. And so with the dialogue program, so the Connect program alumni, Jen, if you could just move the one slide up, thank you. So our Connect program alumni tend to be between the ages of 18 and 21, sometimes as high as 25, depending on their age when they entered tertiary education or their youth communities. And what we found was a fairly static percentage that we've had, where about 30% of the people who go through the dialogue program wish to engage in further activities. And so we have tried various different methodologies of how to find the sort of the virtuous circle of us giving to alumni and alumni giving back, and to understand what their needs are, what our needs are, and to find kind of the sweet spots where those meet. So we have created things like small engagement roles for alumni. So once you've graduated through the program, you can be a teaching assistant or a program coordinator, either at your institution or campus, the following year, by way of ongoing engagement with the virtual exchange opportunities, as well as with the organization. We've learned over the years that young people who go through the program are often hungry to meet with other members of the Soliya community, members of the Soliya team. We happen to be globally dispersed as well, and they're hungry to engage at that level. So we've put forward small opportunities to make that happen. We also open up remote internships where they can engage with Soliya from the back end, which we also find have been well received by young people the world over. And then the last thing, which is a little bit more of a lift, is to create a version of our facilitation training that is geared for the alumni who want to start moving in the direction of becoming facilitators. And so we have a basic facilitation training, which is about a 10-hour training. And I would say, again, about a third of our alumni express interest in doing that training after they graduate from the program. We find that it provides, obviously great development for them, but it also provides a wonderful kind of energy to our alumni community. Because our programming takes place in the online platform, we have a learning management and a content management system that's linked to that. So all young people who engage in the program have access to one another in one place, which is also another kind of place where we've seen alumni engagement activated. So that's the alumni engagement history for the Connect program in terms of what we've been able to do. And then for the volunteer engagement, so our facilitators who moderate the dialogue groups tend to be from professional backgrounds. So they tend to be more graduate students and upwards, people who have day jobs who do this because they're truly interested in dialogue process. And what we learned, and largely that community functions on a volunteer basis. And so again, through much feedback with that community, going back and forth to understand their needs and our needs, we developed a fairly elaborate structure for their engagement and growth with Soliya. And so the easiest piece of that was to create different roles for the facilitators. So you've got facilitators, and then you've got coaches and mentors who are assigned to the facilitators to help their development. And then you've got trainers who become folks who proliferate the training. And so we develop these different roles with the assistance of our dedicated community members, and they have longevity now. So people know that you can be a facilitator for X amount of time, you can apply to be a coach, you can apply to be a trainer, etc. And it provides both variety as well as professional development for them. And then we also invite them to have access to one another. So again, that networking element where they share either experiences that they have whilst they're functioning as any of these roles, and they kind of do a peer assistance model there to help each other out, or they can also share about their own day jobs and professional communities and opportunities. And so you have, these people are sharing internships and opportunities, and can anybody help me with this, and does anybody live here, and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty vibrant space for them. And then we learned that there's also a hunger to allow people to showcase the work that they do, and to have professional engagement, not just with other Solians, but with others in our network who are seasoned professionals in areas that are of interest to them, folks who are doing research that's of interest, folks who are, rock stars in their respective fields, who we can invite in to do webinars, or allow people to, within the community, to do what we call community shares, where they come in and talk about their work. And that's been quite successful, and they clearly enjoy these opportunities a lot. And then we also took that sort of heavy lift moment and created advanced training modules for the folks in our community. So as a facilitator, if there are as we realize that there are certain dynamics and difficult, challenging situations that come up in these dialogue groups, or just with virtual exchange writ large. And so we've created modules and webinars and sort of live synchronous trainings that we make available to the community year round. So those are all the pieces of what we have done. Now obviously there's been a lot of learning along the way for us, and there has also been things that we tried that didn't work, and moreover things that we'd like to try more of, which I think I'll go into in the Q&A section rather than right now. But just to say that I think on some, I would say that we have done more work to engage our alumni and our volunteer community than we have yet successfully done to engage a greater percentage of our dialogue community. And so that's the piece where I feel like we as an organization would want to do more of. And finally, I would just want to place one caveat to all of this, which is that the folks on the team who work to do all this engagement and do the thinking around our strategy for alumni are not the people presenting this webinar. And so I want to make sure that I'm representing them well, but asserting that I am not, in fact, the expert. I am just the voice today. So thank you very much, and I think I'll hand over to Jen.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen, and I am a program officer here at World Learning. And just want to very quickly introduce the organization. For those of you who don't know, we're a global nonprofit, and our work centers around education, sustainable development, and exchange programs. We've been around for about 85 years, and we have some of our statistics listed below, but we work with participants from over 150 countries. And my program specifically, which I'll go into more detail, is for students in Iraq and the United States. So the program that I'll be talking about today with regards to alumni engagement is called the Digital Young Leaders Exchange Program. It's a very long name, but it's dial-up for short at the very top. And this program was started in 2016 as a program funded by the Stevens Initiative. And it focuses on just virtual exchange between youth in these two countries. It's a 3-month program over the summer. So from June to August, and students kind of apply individually and participate independently in this program. So not doing this with a teacher or with a classroom. The goals of the program are mostly about trying to develop the students' leadership skills, And when they engage with youth from another country, understanding each other and hopefully being inspired by different cultures to then do some things that are more addressing certain issues in their communities. And so really centered around leadership, civic engagement, and mutual understanding. And the program is about 4 to 6 hours each week, including both synchronous and asynchronous activities, which would then include some videos, chat conversations. We also do some webinars, and also games. And so you'll see here at the bottom right, that's just a photo from one of our activities from the summer where students participate individually from their own communities and get online and talk about issues. And so we've been implementing this program for 2 years now. So we had 2 cohorts. And so we've been thinking very deeply about ways to engage our alumni. And so I'm just going to very briefly go through kind of our 3 main tiers of alumni engagement strategies and what we do to kind of achieve these goals. So to start, I think the first goal that we try to do with our alumni is to foster and also sustain our relationships with them. And so throughout the summer, in the 3 months, we bond very closely, we talk on a daily basis, and we want to sustain that relationship even after the summer. And so first we have public Facebook groups that are for our programs. And so we post regularly on that Facebook page to keep them engaged on news on either dial-up or on virtual exchange programs. And we also really take a look at our analytics, and we see that 1/4 of our audience is between the ages 18 and 24. And so we developed some more interactive or just fun content with photos, videos, or quizzes to keep them engaged. And then we also have some more private groups, and so we have a private group for each of our cohort. So one for the 2016 alumni, one for 2017, and that really is to build that sense of community and to make them feel that they are special for being a part of this program. And at World Learning, we also have an in-person exchange program with Iraqi and American students called the Iraqi Young Leaders Exchange Program. And so we have a private group for all alumni part of that Iraqi program. And then we also have a private group for all World Learning Youth Program alumni. And so this is kind of a perk that they get after completing a program. We add them to these private groups so that they feel like they can get some more unique opportunities through these channels. And of course, we engage them through our blog. So we have blogging platforms for both dial-up and on World Learning. And so we talk about their projects and we try to feature them a lot to keep that relationship going. So moving on to kind of tier 2, and so this is engaging them even more. We want to get their support with the work that we do by using their desire to give back. So after this summer, they had a great experience. They really want to do something for the program or continue their cultural exchange experiences. So the first thing that we do is we've created a position called Alumni Ambassadors. And these are alumni of our program who then go about doing recruitment for the next cohort in their local communities. And we really assign them that title to give them a sense of empowerment and ownership and for resume building purposes as well, so that they feel like they are formally a part of our dial-up community. And we also try to build up a lot of volunteer activities or volunteer opportunities. And so whenever we host programming, which I'll talk about later, we reach out constantly to see if anyone wants to volunteer, and we try to keep them engaged that way as well. And I think similar to what Wade was talking about earlier with regards to facilitators, we also ask alumni of our program to then return to serve as facilitators for the next cohort, which a lot of our students are interested in, and it's almost another professional development opportunity as well. And for this opportunity, we also open it up to the Iraqi Young Leaders Exchange Program alumni to build more cross-program alumni network and collaboration as well. And last, we also conduct quite a few focus groups and interviews, and we emphasize to alumni that we really value their experiences, opinions, and so whenever we do these type of work, we reach out to them and help them understand that when we learn, it is quite participatory in nature, and it's only through them that we can really improve our programming. And so whenever these opportunities come up, we always reach out to that network. And then moving on to the last tier, just providing support to our alumni and trying to help them increase their impact on the ground. So like I was mentioning before, after the program, our goal is to really get them to address an issue in their community by developing a project. So one thing that I've been thinking more about is kind of the framing of our program. And so initially we really said that this is a 3-month summer program, and then there are optional alumni activities afterwards. But we really are starting to see that these alumni activities are just as important to the skills development of our participants. And so I'm trying to help them see this as almost a year-long program, and that they do a lot of heavy learning in the summer, but a lot of the practice and application come afterwards. So some of these alumni programming that we do include what we call reunions. So we do 2 main reunions after the summer. One is a regional reunion, and so students get together in different regions in Iraq and learn more project development skills. We also do a virtual reunion in the spring, about 6 months after the summer, and we get all the students together, which is actually happening this coming Saturday. So we have a huge virtual reunion with all the participants. And this is kind of a space for them to reconnect, build skills, and also share on some project successes. And then second, we also have mini grant opportunities or fellowship opportunities for them. And so some of them are doing such great work in their communities and need some seed funding to get their projects started. And so working very closely with the in-person Iraqi exchange program, our dial-up alumni can apply for grant opportunities with their alumni to implement their projects. And so we really want to help them understand that we want to support them in their work, and this is one way that we can do that. And then kind of going along with what I was saying about the in-person exchange program, a lot of our students then get re-inspired by their virtual exchange experience and then want to now participate in an in-person exchange program. And so we heavily market that opportunity to our students, including the Iraqi exchange program. And I actually did have 4 or 5 alumni of Dial-Up who then went on to do the in-person exchange program. And so really continuing that engagement. Yeah, and so just very quickly, some of the things that our alumni have been doing. So our students, this is a picture of our Dial-Up alumni with an ILUP alumni working together to reopen the school library in their community. We have alumni in California who fundraise to help provide more halal food options for immigrants in their communities. And then we have students in Iraq who are providing school supplies to IDPs. And this is also working in conjunction with other Dial-Up alumni. And then some more fun projects where students, these are all Dial-Up alumni from this past summer, hoping to spread positive attitudes in their communities, and so giving away just random gifts of kindness. And so these are just some sample of projects that we do to try to support and help sustain that alumni relationship. Yeah, so I think I will stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Jen and Waidehi, for your great presentations. I'd like to open it up to questions, and I have a few that I've been collecting here from the audience. Those of you who are here, you're welcome to go into the questions section in the control panel and type in any questions you might have. There were a few clarifying questions that I'd like to start with before turning to maybe some broader questions. One came from Steve, asking if you could just say again, which LMS or platform do you use to connect with alumni, or which platforms? And this doesn't need to be a long answer, I suppose.
So we connect with our alumni using the Solia LMS and platform. We have one, and so which all participants have access to, and then they can maintain that access to their, as Jen described, sort of, their own groups, their years, cohort, all that kind of thing. And then we also have, we found that organically they go ahead and make Facebook groups themselves, which carry forward and last a long time in terms of their engagement with one another, as well as our own Facebook page, of course. And then for the volunteers, again, it's a mix between our LMS, but also a Google Hub that we've created for our volunteers to engage on.
Yeah, we primarily use Facebook, public and private groups, in echoing Waidehi's point about developing them organically from our alumni, and they go on to create groups on WhatsApp or Telegram. One thing that I have noticed is that Facebook is highly successful in Iraq, but we're still trying to kind of figure out a way what's the most suitable platform for American students, and where American high school kids are on these days, whether that be Instagram or Snapchat, and how we can kind of utilize those platforms more effectively.
Thank you both. We have a question from Linda. The question is, maybe this came up, but how old are your participants, and how do you schedule the virtual engagements with them? Is there a regular time, and what platform do they use? And I know, Waidehi, you mentioned that Solia uses a custom platform, but maybe Jen, you could just remind a little bit about how that works.
Sure. So our participants are about 14 to 18, and for, I think, alumni engagement, we use GoToMeeting. Sometimes we use Zoom. And in terms of scheduling, we try to, if it's for a very large group of all our participants, we actually do it on the weekends. And so there's about 7 or sometimes 8-hour difference between Iraq and the United States. So we do it about midday here to account for all the different time zones in the US, and then for Iraqis at night.
And you found that it's possible to have young people in Iraq log in at that time, and sort of, I know a lot of programs run through schools. Can you say just a little bit more about the choice to operate basically independently of a structured school system and how that worked?
Yeah, so the time zone has not been too big of a problem, because we are independent of school time, and also during the summer. So our actual exchange happens during the summer, and so students, and we also have a lot of asynchronous activities, and so they can do it on their own times. But for the more synchronous activities, we either schedule it beforehand with all of them, and that will take into account the time difference. And sometimes it would have to be on the weekends, because some students do take on jobs during the summer.
Our age group is post-secondary, so all our participants and alumni tend to be 18 plus. And so whilst the scheduling process for the programming, including the training for the alumni as well, is definitely a logistics issue. We find that the time differences are less of an issue for our age group, purely because, again, as Jen said, either the autonomy to do so outside of their committed times for school.
Thank you both. Waidehi, at the end of your presentation, you alluded to all of the things that that Solia has thought about doing or has experimented with, but is interested in doing more. So could both of you talk a little bit about the gaps in alumni engagement or the opportunities that you see on the horizon?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we haven't necessarily done systematically with our dialogue alumni is just even the soft touch of keeping in touch with them. So regular contact through an alumni newsletter or something like that. We haven't done that, and I think we would like to. I think the other thing is to the space that we created for networking for the volunteer alumni, for the facilitators, we have put more resource into in terms of creating opportunities for them on there, encouraging their organic networking, whereas we haven't done that with our dialogue alumni either. And we, in fact, have discovered how active they are through their own efforts to create Facebook groups and so on and so forth. And I feel like that energy needs to be brought to a more centered space amongst ourselves. I also think the other thing that I would want us to explore that we've been talking about is something that Jen talked about, because you have the advantage of having both in-person and virtual programs as part of your own organization. So Leah's programming is all virtual. We do not run any in-person exchange programs, but there's so much symbiosis between how much people would want to do stuff like that. And we have so many stories of alumni who went ahead and did it, used us as contact mechanisms, but went ahead and created opportunities for themselves to exchange physically. And I think that if virtual exchange and physical exchange organizations could have more contact amongst their networks, could create kind of shared alumni opportunities so that folks who have been on physical exchange can, keep going through doing more virtual exchange work and vice versa. I think that there's lots of room to play there to do this better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, I think I mentioned a little bit briefly about trying to figure out a way to engage our American or US alumni more. I think that is kind of a strategy that we have yet to really figure out. And going along with what Wade was saying about tapping into the in-person exchange network as well, if there's some way we can connect all the US alumni from these cultural exchange programs in general, because they share a different set of challenges in implementing their projects compared to their Iraqi counterparts, and really want to create a space for American participants to share. And I think another thing would be to try to strengthen that engagement between Iraqi and Americans. I think that collaboration between these two groups of students is still relatively weaker in terms of the alumni horizon, and so thinking about ways to keep them working together even after the summer exchange. And I think we have these informal groups on Facebook, but I would love to have a database somewhere of all our alumni, and they can then go in and search for each other. And so at some point they're going to be working, and so if we can find where they're working and they want to connect with each other that way, I think that would be really cool.
Jen, that raises a question that has come in, and I'm trying to see who it is so I can give them proper credit. I'm not seeing who it is right now, but there was a question about security and safety, and there is also something that occurs to me from what you said in your presentation. Tell me if I have this wrong, but what I heard was that you have created different sizes of groups. You've created small groups for people who went through the same experience together at the same time, and then increasingly large groups so that all alumni from a certain program, or maybe all alumni from a certain country, can be communicating with each other. And I'm interested to know from your perspective, as well as from Waidehi's, how you think about group size and how you think about safety and feeling of inclusion. Why do you make choices to have groups of certain sizes? Why do you make choices to share information across, between different participants? Because it seems like there might be some trade-offs there to me in terms of how much transparency there is between different people, how much freedom there is, but also how much risk there might be as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our intent originally to have different groups was to just increase access to information and increase access to opportunities. And so they have their own cohort group. So if I'm an alumni of Dial-Up, I'm in my Dial-Up alumni group, and then I'm also in the Iraq alumni group, and I'm also in the World Learning Youth Program alumni group. And so they give different types of information in each of these groups. And we have had students from our Iraqi program who collaborate with another cultural exchange program that is not Iraq, and they work on a project together. And so we're just kind of increase their access to networks and opportunities. In terms of security, we haven't necessarily faced an issue with that. I think our students themselves are fairly aware of photos and things to share in that way. And so we haven't encountered that particularly, but I know that, again, Facebook is not the most secure platform, and I'm sure that there could be something that does happen in terms of people clicking on each other's profiles and finding out information that way.
For us, again, it's just a little bit different because they tend to be a bit older. And so there's again, their level of independence and autonomy becomes a little bit different. When our platform is created for industry standard security certification, and so when they engage on there, that security is upon us, and we have tech support who run breach protocols daily and so on and so forth. So that kind of piece of it is very secure. Also, we don't cross-share any communication or information amongst them. When they come together in their groups, they introduce themselves to each other. When they're on the platform, they don't have to share any information because they're already registered and they can just talk to each other there. When they choose, however, to then go on to create Facebook or WhatsApp or Google groups, then they're doing so with one another's consent. So that level of kind of personal ownership is theirs. For the Google platform, we, again, those folks tend to be older, but we don't share any personal information across the network. That's on a person-to-person basis.
Thank you very much. I have a sort of a cascade of questions here that I think are interrelated. I think there were a few folks who wanted a little bit more clarification on what some of these live alumni reunions might be in the parlance of World Learning, or maybe, Waidehi, you talked about some activities that resemble this, community shares or other things. So could you both describe just a little bit more, once again, what sort of the nuts and bolts are? Are these invitations sent to everybody? Are they mandatory or are they voluntary? Is there an agenda that you all develop in advance, or do you deputize a certain alumni to run it themselves, or is it just open? How does that work? And then how many people typically are there for a given reunion? What's a good target size that you found? So thank you, and thanks to Alia and Shanti and others who've asked good questions here.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about just virtual reunions. And so we do this with alumni of our program. So the invitation is sent out to just alumni of that cohort. I guess the best way to visualize this, maybe it's a longer webinar. And so to kind of think about what a virtual reunion is just, it's a webinar, but we engage them in the design process of it. And so what I mean by that is we have alumni who sign up to lead sessions during these reunions to either share out on their projects, or if there was a skill. So some of our students are very successful at fundraising, and so they then come back and then teach a 5 to 10 minute session on fundraising. And another goal of our reunion is to really reignite that relationship or the spark that they built from the summer, so as to sustain them for the next few months or years. And so sometimes we use Zoom, which does have a breakout session function. And so we break them up into smaller dialogue groups so that they can have that space online to discuss more personal issues or just challenges that they faced from project implementation. I think with regards to attendance, I think it really varies. So I think with our U.S. alumni, we have fewer those that return to do these reunions. These are not mandatory, even though I think with what I was thinking about trying to reframe the importance of the alumni activities, I really want to make these mandatory moving forward. And then with our Iraqi alumni, we see a lot of participation in these because I think they see this as a unique like personal development opportunity that they may not necessarily get otherwise.
For us, so the things that happen, so just about everything is virtual unless we have, so for example, we have a team, a Solia team that is building out in Tunis, in Tunisia. And so we, there is the possibility where the Tunis team sends out a call within Tunisia to say any alumni of the Connect program and or the training, we are meeting at such and such time in such and such place. And so we've done those in small scale in Egypt and Jordan, not yet in Tunisia actually. And we've also done that in cities around the US. So someone will put out a call to say, hey, all Solians, let's meet XYZ. They tend to be almost exclusively happening for alumni of the training rather than alumni of the dialogue program so far. And I think one of the things that I would love to do is start cross-pollinating those, because often what happens for us is alumni of the dialogue program eventually become facilitators. So they're kind of on that path. It would be nice for them to meet. Our virtual things that we do for alumni, so things like community shares, dinners for 8, town halls, those are all, the call is sent out to all members of the community, and it's whoever wishes to attend. The community shares are a place for alumni themselves or volunteers, members of the community, to highlight their own work or their own personal interests. And so those are led by various members of the community and attended, by folks. I wouldn't say that we have massive attendance on those. It varies vastly. And then the town halls, which we run, where we invite the community of volunteers and facilitators to engage substantively in discussion themselves, which is something they don't get to do when they're functioning as facilitators, have had much bigger turnouts. They are usually facilitated by a member of the Solia team, and they tend to have bigger numbers, also online, completely voluntary. So, that we don't have any mandatory alumni activities as of now.
Thank you both so much. We have a cluster of questions from Jennifer, Steve, and Kathia. And specifically, there's a question about what language is used in your programs. I know this goes beyond just the alumni engagement, but it relates there specifically. So if there's any difference, please explain both. But if you could just talk about the languages used in your programs, and more broadly, the question is, how can programs like this be made available to people from a diverse range of backgrounds and different socioeconomic backgrounds? And specifically, how can language and technology and other things be overcome to facilitate that? I realize this is a much broader question, but I think our audience has some very broad questions, and you guys are in a good position to speak to that a little bit. So we'd appreciate if you could speak to that generally, and if there's any particular angle related to alumni, you're welcome to speak on that too. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure I could speak at the alumni, just within the alumni slice of pie on this one. So our programs take place almost entirely in English. We do tend to have multilingual facilitators who are capable of being translators if need be, although it's not a guaranteed function of every group. We have done this in various ways over the years, frankly, and have been waiting for technology to come up with the right answer to this. Unfortunately, when you deal with languages like Arabic and when you deal with accents, technology just hasn't quite caught up yet in terms of like an easy, Google Translate or an easy widget that truly allows translation to happen at a level where it doesn't take away from the dialogue process itself. The other thing is we have learned through our engagement with our partners and, you know, talking to the folks who we're bringing into the dialogue, that young people enjoy the opportunity to try out their English with their peer groups rather than in a more stilted language learning format, and that there's something about this learning that they really enjoy. Now, obviously, this sets up a power dynamic, and so the key pedagogical tool to this is addressing that as the facilitators and making sure that that's understood as a dynamic. With the training, it's a little bit different. We have translations of the training in French and in Arabic, and so we do run the facilitation training in all three languages, and that happens purely on a demand basis. So depending on how many people are coming up to ask for trainings in different languages. I will say that we are in active conversation with other partners in the virtual exchange space to start thinking about how could we start doing this in multiple languages. So, you know, in Arabic and in French and so on and so forth. I think there are some structural hurdles to that in terms of how do you outreach to exactly the right populations to bring them in? How do you ensure that there are you know, enough folks wanting to engage in those languages without going either intra-regional or too elite or something like that? And then just to touch on that diversity question as well that you had pinned on there, Henry. What, you know, because we work in the tertiary education space, what we've been trying to do is diversify the partnerships to more youth-oriented organizations, you know, local community organizations, youth groups, folks like that, where the population is a little bit more diversified. And then within the higher education space, just ensuring that we are public, private, community college, technical school, rural, urban, you know, as much as we can be wherever we are to try and make sure that we're reaching those who would otherwise not have access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so for our program, it's also English language program, and so everything is conducted in English. We do have, I think, US participants who are Arabic language learners, so that sometimes helps a little bit in terms of understanding, and our facilitators, I guess similar to Celia, some of them do speak Arabic, some don't, but that is not a requirement for us. I think, yeah, reaching different socioeconomic backgrounds, I think our applications for this program is pretty comprehensive. So we do ask quite a bit of information from our applicants, which could include native language, and sometimes we do ask about parent backgrounds to try to gauge their socioeconomic levels that way. And so our selection process is quite comprehensive. So we go through trying to get a good balance of public-private schools, native language spread, and we also really try our best to understand kind of where they're coming from in terms of income levels. But for our in-person exchange program, it's been done in English for the past 10 years, and last year we did launch an Arabic version of it. And so that, looking at our recruitment data, we have seen that has helped us tremendously to reach people in more rural provinces in Iraq. And so I think similar with Wade, I would love to see kind of a virtual exchange program done in the native language of our participants, but recognizing that is probably further down the road in terms of all the cultural and curriculum context that needs to be taken into account.
Thank you so much. There are several more great questions from the audience here, but there was one that we had thought up in advance, and that is to ask how you think each of your programs or virtual exchange programs in general might benefit from cross-program cooperation through the alumni lens. And Jen, you've kind of alluded to it just now by talking about the interplay between the ILEP program run by World Learning and the DILEP program, which is what we're discussing here. So from whatever perspective you all have, what do you think the opportunities there might be I know some of the folks on the line work on their own virtual exchange programs, maybe at a different age level, and would be interested in either having you hand them your alumni or handing their alumni to you. What ideas do you all have in this realm?
I think there's massive opportunity here to set up kind of a marketplace for handshakes, you know, where we cross-pollinate things that we are sending to our alumni, or as we're sending things to alumni, we make sure that we include information about programs that they might have access to create, you know, memoranda of understanding amongst organizations where you say, if you're an alumni of this program, you have a leg up, or whatever, that it's recognized in some way, you know. I think that this could go a massively long way, particularly if you start creating synergies between, so for example, you know, Peace Corps alumni having an easier track into our facilitation training program. It's kind of a marriage made, you know, folks who come back from Peace Corps service want to know what else can I do? How else can I engage? This is a great way, because once you train as a facilitator, you can participate in these dialogues. You know, physical exchange youth who alumni, or our alumni who then want to apply for physical exchanges or whatever it is, somewhere where there's a box that gets ticked that says, oh, right on, you know, you've done this, that's great, whatever. And the more kind of comprehensively we could create this web, I think the more you'd find that, you know, you create that ongoing lifelong learning, that ongoing engagement, that sort of pay it forward, that, you know, that we're all kind of seeking for our folks.
I love that idea, and I think that our alumni would love to do something, become a Thalian, but I really love what you said. I think that one thing that did come to mind was how the Department of State does have their own exchange alumni, and so that is an opportunity for all participants of their State Department programs. And so whether this could be something that is replicated by someone leading the virtual exchange field to create that database or that platform to connect all virtual exchange alumni. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for that, someone to really serve as the center of that network. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to say that I think one of the biggest opportunities from alumni, you know, I want to make sure that people don't see that as duplication. So it's not, you know, we're programming the same kids over and over again, which I understand, you know, there's a danger of that. But I also think that the thing we've learned more than anything from our alumni is that they talk to each other, not each other as in alumni of the program, just they talk to their own friends. So if one class on one university campus has taken this, you know, X program, whatever program it is, you've got 30 spokespeople for virtual exchange. You've got 30 spokespeople to talk about, you know, multicultural learning that you've now created. And so finding a way to ensure that that proliferates by cross-pollinating things is really worth it, I think.
Linda shared a question earlier in the discussion that I'd like to come back to now. Do you feel that in-person exchange is an essential part of international exchange? Do you feel that a program can be virtual only and have an impact?
A question for me to answer.
Not a trick question.
I was going to say, where are we going? So, look, our learning is that if you conduct a virtual exchange program where the bulk of it is synchronous exchange, where they are seeing each other, they're hearing each other, and the same group is meeting across a period of time, and you have it moderated in a way that creates the space for deep engagement and the space for learning to happen, that impact can indeed be incredibly powerful and it can last. our exchange program is only virtual, you know, and we find that the level of impact lasts over a period of time. You can compare it to control groups. You can, you know, and there's so much more work we can do on impact measurement, don't get me wrong, and so much more longitudinal work to be done, which we're just embarking on. But my short answer would be yes, but it takes investment. It's not, you know, it's not a no cost option, but it takes investment. I think one nice thing to think about in terms of virtual exchange, some people say, well, you know, when you pull people into virtual exchange programs, you're still speaking to the choir, right? I like to think of it as like layers of cake. You've got the small layer at the top of this fabulous cake, which is the small percentage of people who by hook or crook can be a part of physical exchange. Then you've got this other layer that can sit right under it, which is a lot bigger, but may flow back and forth, you know what I mean? Like, and then you've got other layers underneath it. And I think you can have different varieties of virtual exchange programs that allow that learning to happen for more and more people. And so I don't think anything has to be seen as a replacement or an instead of, but I think it's more about, if the mission is to truly have young people, as many young people as possible, have an international experience, then my sense is virtual has to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my answer would be yes too, and I think for two reasons. One is, I mean, virtual exchange is reaching those that don't have access to in-person exchange programs, and that is probably like my biggest reason for advocating for virtual exchange, is to increase that access. And I think too, like I mentioned before, we did have a few alumni who did our digital program who then did the in-person exchange program, and so had the opportunity to meet with them and talk about their experiences. And you know, as the manager of Dial-Up, I'm worried that they come on this in-person exchange program, they love it, and they forget about Dial-Up. But I was really surprised when I met them in Washington, D.C., and I talked to them about their experience, and what really stood out to them was that initial contact online when they saw their American counterparts, and that was what ignited their interest in culture exchange. And so a few of them actually told me that their experiences on Dial-Up was actually just a lot more memorable, and what really kept them to become passionate in this field. And so I think that there is a lot of potential and a lot of research, again, that we still have to do, but that I wouldn't just undermine virtual exchange because it's not in person.
We have time for just one last question. We have two questions that have come in from Kathia and Shanti that are closely interrelated, and they are people getting micro-credentials or badges for participating or for becoming alumni or anything related to alumni? So maybe you can touch on those things. And are people getting credit for being in the program or for doing any of the alumni activities that you describe? And this will just be maybe 30 seconds each of you.
Sure. So for credit, the answer is yes. If you're linked to any kind of institution, the programming embeds into existing courses, and so you get credit. If you're linked to a youth group, you get some kind of credential linked to that. So for that's the credit piece of it. The recognition piece of it is something that we are looking into doing in the future for our alumni, but also just to say that the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange Program that the EU has just rolled out, they are very much doing a badging system. So different people at different levels of engagement, so alumni, facilitators, participants, professors, will all get a badge for participating in some kind of virtual exchange. So the seeding of that is taking place as we speak.
We don't do badges. We issue certificates that certify them in certain skills that they gain throughout the program.
Thank you both so much for a really lively session. Thanks to the audience for great questions and for your attention. We will be sharing a recording of this webinar on our website, on our blog, stevensinitiative.org. On the screen here, you see the links to our website, to the DILEP program website of the World Learning Organization and SOLIA's site, contact information for all three organizations, and we hope you'll follow us and tweet at us on Twitter. So thanks again so much to Waidehi and Jen for a great presentation, and you can check our website for a recording of the session. Thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you.